Welcome once again to another edition of the Catholic View for Women. So good to have you along. I'm Teresa Tomeo, one of the hosts of this program, along with my co-hosts, of course, Astrid Bennett Gutierrez from Hispanics for Life and Janet Morana from Priests for Life and Silent No More. I also host a daily radio show that's co-produced by EWTN and Ave Maria Radio called Catholic Connection, and I hope you tune in every single day to listen to that as well. Now, let me give a little disclaimer here, because all of us are going to get our Italian up, our Spanish up, and our Irish up over this study that came out earlier this year that went viral and caused a big brouhaha in the world of our overly sexualized and overly radical feminist culture. So, did you know that there are no more Mr. Nice Guys, or that we shouldn't want to be involved with and potentially married to or date a Mr. Nice Guy? No, it's the mean guys, the ones that treat us like dirt, that are really the nice guys. Talk about stepping through the looking glass. Talk about living in a topsy-turvy world. Welcome to the world of the 21st century. This is nuts. There was actually a study, and this is what we're going to talk about, that was called Benevolent Sexist or Sexism. Basically what it says is that the guys who are treating you nicely, perhaps opening a door for you, being just generally polite, or perhaps your husband is a good husband and treats you with dignity and puts you on a pedestal because he loves you and adores you and wants to treat you like a daughter of the king, which is the way we're supposed to be treated. But oh no, don't be fooled. He's really a bad guy in disguise. Are you kidding me?
I know. It was absolutely ridiculous. And I mean, they had, if you saw the original article, there was these bullet points.
But this was done by a university on the East Coast, by the way, just to mention that.
And then, of course, they went over to the United Kingdom, across the pond there, and the Daily Mail is what did a big story on it, and it went even more viral. But they did this little chart of hostile sexist versus benevolent sexist. So the hostile guys, point one is they ban women from sports clubs, okay? And the benevolent sexists, they hold doors open
the
for women.
The atrocity of it all. I'm
terrible.
so ashamed. How dare they hold a door open
first
for
of all,
us? Who do they think they are?
But first of all, holding doors open.
I hold doors open for people all the time.
I hold doors open too. It's a kindness to do, as a courtesy, to a fellow human being. Oh no, let the door slam in their face. That's better. I mean, it's really. I mean, how does that make you? I don't get that one. A ban, and like the hostile guys, they ban women from sports clubs, and then if you're, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me. And of course, the other point was the hostile sexists, they wolf whistle at women. Now, listen, I live in New York City, and we go by construction sites all the time. I haven't never heard, I don't know where this wolf whistling at women comes from, but I have never heard it. You know how they claim the construction workers will whistle girls as they go by? I don't know, maybe it's something from the past. You know, maybe they're in the, I don't know, the 50s, the 60s or something.
Well, you know what they're trying to do here is they're trying to make the good guys look like the bad guys. And so they pick the worst of the worst. Obviously, this is mistreatment of women.
Yes,
Wolf
whistling at women is horrible.
Loving topless calendars, leaving the housework to the wives, which is so untrue in my household. My husband has always helped me, and he's better at the housework than I am. He irons, he sews.
When you stay at Teresa's house, Dominic makes the coffee in the morning, and he brings it to Teresa before, you know, I mean, and to me too, when I stay at Teresa's house, Dominic's wonderful like that.
Believe women who claim to want equality actually want special treatment. Say most women interpret innocent remarks as sexism. So they take the worst of the worst, real sexist, and then they put up the good guys.
Yeah,
well,
that's what I was about to say.
That's sexist too.
This wolf whistling, they compare that to men who call women dear, love, honey. Oh, come on. They're comparing that.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
The thing is, these gestures might seem small or trivial or what's the big deal, but in reality, it's so much in the nature of men, and God put it there to have a spirit of mission, of sacrifice, of wanting to express these things. So as women too, how beautiful is it to see, and I still see it today, young men that are at the gym or anywhere, they're ready to open the door. And as a woman, I feel like I step back and I let them do that, and it feels so nice for a woman, because God put in us a sense of femininity and receptivity to these gestures. So I think they're just these gestures that are natural to men and women. So as the lines get blurred, women start to reject the notion that we have a special role, that men also have a special role, that's where we get into trouble. And I think this is what it's pointing to.
This is the aim of this. It's to continue this radical feminism of the idea that women and men have to attack, not attract or work together. It is totally against what the church teaches in beautiful documents such as Mulieris Dignitatem and the Papal Letter to Women, both by St. John Paul II, that we are to complement each other. Not to fight each other, but that we balance each other out. And this is saying, no, no, no. It wants women to be suspect. It wants women to think that all men are treating them badly. And then what do? They turn around and they embrace something as evil and as awful as 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, you look at that movie when it came out earlier this year in February, how many hundreds of millions of dollars has it made around the world now? And it's about a sadomasochistic, abusive, totally abusive man who takes advantage of an innocent girl. And this is all the rage. So that's good, and the good guys are bad.
I know. I mean, the other thing that they're picking on about the good guys here is refuse to split a bill. I mean, what's wrong with, what's wrong if the guy wants to treat you to dinner?
You know, in Mexico,
I mean, what's wrong with that?
In Mexico, there'll be a group of friends, guys and girls. The bill comes, the guys start talking about how they're going to pay the bill. The girls know. They're not even the girlfriends. It's just something beautiful and natural in the culture that men kind of have these gestures, have these roles, and it's not a bad thing.
It's respect for women.
It's respect, appreciation too.
You know.
Do you think women understand how much we're setting ourselves up to be treated badly?
Yeah.
Instead of raising our standards, we're lowering them further and further. I think that's the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's utter insanity.
Well, there were all kinds of courtesies that. Well, I mean, I was born in 1952. I don't lie about my age. And when I was growing up as a kid in Brooklyn, men actually tipped their hats to women, if they went down the street. Holding doors was just automatic. I mean, you did not. But they would pull out a chair for a woman, like in the restaurant, pull out a chair.
Give up your seat.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, if a woman, say, came into the room and everyone's sitting at a table, the men would get up. And help her sit down and seat her, and then if she got up again, they would stand up out of respect.
And reverence.
Reverence. There was all these, I guess you would call them polite customs, but it was a way of life. Everybody did it, and it was beautiful. I mean, heck, I didn't like when doors started getting slammed in my face when I went to college in the 70s.
And guys don't even know. They're so conscious of how bad this has gotten. I mean, we all travel a lot because we all speak and we all, I'm out 3 or 4 times a month, as I'm sure you guys are. I love it when a guy says to me, can I please help you with your luggage? When I flew in to do this taping, not only in the overhead, but in the luggage compartment, and we come down here, we have all these different outfits and we have all this stuff that we have to bring. And I had a huge suitcase, and a gentleman said to me, can I help you with that? And I said, yes, please. Doesn't offend me. I'm like, thank you so much.
I know. But especially I love when they want to help you to put it up in the overhead. I always have a laptop case, and I was like, can I help you with that? Or help you take it down?
I thought you'd never ask.
Yeah,
And even in the cartoons, remember the cartoon characters, the girl and the boy and the girl, and there's a puddle, and they put their jacket over the puddle so she can walk over it. These kind of things where it's natural, I think, for a man to want to express his appreciation, his love, in these ways that are even, I think, sacrificial, that really go out of their way. It's a natural thing. But then you think about how that kind of can also point to our resistance of accepting God in our life.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
If you look at some of these points in the benevolent sexism, and by the way, we'll have a link to this ridiculous study so you can,
you can look
get
at
your own blood pressure raised as high as you want. A couple of these things point directly or indirectly to Catholic teaching, and this is an attack on the church and the church teaching on dignity of women. Okay. Offer women their jacket if they look cold. That's being polite, but say a good woman should be put on a pedestal. What does the church teach about the dignity of women? All women, of course, starting with Our Lady, are put on a pedestal. We're all considered children of God, and we're all heirs to the throne because we're sons and daughters of the King of Kings. But say a good woman should be put on a pedestal, and say men should make sacrifices to provide for women. Why is that bad? But see, this is what they're saying. It's bad. And when and I've been married almost 32 years now. And when I think about how our relationship has changed when we came back to the church and getting a true understanding of what it means to really love, the whole idea of marriage is self-sacrifice.
That's right. Yes.
And this is contradicting that and attacking that.
Ephesians 5, where we're supposed to, a spouse is supposed to love his wife the way that Christ loved the church. Sacrificially, he suffered. He gave his whole life for the church. Christ did, and then we're called to imitate that. So all these things, you're right, absolutely point to this. And you look at, for example, the book of the Bible, Song of Songs, where the marriage is compared to the union between God and the soul.
Exactly.
So the more that you blur that, I began to read into this and say, this is a rebellion against God, clearly, because when you begin to blur the sexes and they represent, they represent God, then this is what's happening here. And as Christians, we have to see that and just kind of call it for what it is. And defend these beautiful gestures that we see.
And some people say, because I get into this a lot with some of my listeners, well, you shouldn't be promoting this because this is a bad study. But we have to talk about these things because this made huge news when this story broke. And as Janet said, the Daily Mail picked it up in the UK and it went even viral over in Europe, and everybody was talking about it. And if we don't talk about it from a Catholic perspective, you're only going to hear about it from what the world says. And it's important for us to draw from what's happening in the culture, which is the whole idea behind this show, to say, okay, these are subtle and not so subtle attacks on the Catholic Church and our Catholic teaching. What do we do with this and how do we address this?
Well, the other thing too is, people don't realize that because of Facebook and all the social media, young people find this stuff and then they're thinking like, oh yeah, that sounds okay.
That's true.
Yeah, that sounds okay. And like you're saying, Teresa, unless we come in there and say, wait a minute, time out. No, this is terrible, this thing.
What it's saying is that we have to accept being treated badly. And if we realize that when a man treats us well, that it's not really a good thing for us, we set ourselves up, as Pam Stenzel has said on this series, of this 6th season that we're doing, that we set ourselves up for this because the girls are, the way they're dressing, the way they're acting, the way they're accepting bad treatment. The research that's been done by experts, for example, like Pam and also Dr. Miriam Grossman, who I've interviewed many times, the way women just put themselves out there and allow themselves to be used and abused, especially sexually, and how we're seeing more violent pornography. This ties, it's all connected.
It's all connected. I like what one of the quotes Pam said was, it's how you bait the hook, basically the kind of guy you're going to attract. Well, if you're dressing very revealing with, I've seen people with their little tushies sticking out practically, and shorts, girls, and of course the tops, they're coming out of them. Well, what kind of guy you think you're going to attract, right? I mean, you're not going to get a good guy.
Right.
But if you're dressed modestly and have nice makeup on, but not like all crazy done up, well, you're going to get a nicer guy attracted to you. It's all like Pam says, how you bait the hook. And if you're baiting it with very scantily clad clothes, then you're going to get someone that's not going to respect you as a woman.
And this point, too, under benevolent sexist, call women love or dear. So what do you want to be called? Hey, you? Or even worse? I mean, my husband and I have all these names for each other.
Oh, I know. Teresa says she calls Dominic Peaches.
Peaches.
So
I call him
cute.
Peaches. I call him Dommy. I have all these. He's going to absolutely go berserk when he sees.
Oh, if he sees the show, he's going to say, "Okay, Janet, Teresa."
I talk about it on the air anyway. But I have all these little terms
endearments.
of endearment.
They're endearments.
He calls me Principessa.
Right.
Every morning he brings me my coffee and he says,
and
Buongiorno,
for those who don't speak Italian, is a princess.
Yeah. and so that's bad? No, those are terms of endearment.
Absolutely.
But this is teaching otherwise. So we're going to actually hear from an expert on this.
Right.
A wonderful professor, a friend of mine at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit. I remember when Janet and I called him to do this interview, he had a field day with this too. So Dr. Eduardo Echeverria will be joining us up next on this edition of The Catholic View for Women. No more Mr. Nice Guy, huh? Well, we'll see about that right after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to this episode of Catholic View for Women. I'm Teresa Tomeo along with Astrid Bennett Gutierrez and Janet Morana. And this episode, we're talking about this absolutely ridiculous study that became a huge story and that we all believe did a lot of damage, additional damage, to the relationship between men and women, the beautiful teaching on male-female complementarity. And we were mentioning before the break that we all believe that this is a direct attack on the Catholic Church. So we want you to be informed. We want you to be able to, when you see a story in the culture, to say, what does the church say about this? And to see all of these undertones where it's like boom, ba-boom, ba-boom, the church is getting attacked repeatedly. We're talking about this study, Benevolent Sexism, that basically says the good guys and nice guys that treat women with respect, for example, if they hold open the door or lift up a piece of luggage if you're on the plane, if they pay your bill at dinner, if they call you lovely names in your relationship, you know, dear or honey, that's all bad and we're supposed to be afraid of that. Really, what are we setting ourselves up with? Well, we did speak with a wonderful expert, as we mentioned before the break, Dr. Echeverria, to weigh in. He's a cultural commentator, but he is also a professor at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in the Archdiocese of Detroit. So let's take a listen to see what Dr. Echeverria has to say about this so-called study.
Well, we don't understand that differences aren't always, they're not bad. The differences between men and women. I mean, people, what was that book years ago, you know, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, you know. The fact is, some of the differences between men and women are cultural. You know, when I grew up in a Mexican home, I didn't wash dishes till I was like 20 years old. There would have been no way. My mother and my grandmother would not have allowed me to wash a dish, you know. But that's not because they thought they were, you know, a lesser sort of human being than the men in the house. You know, that was simply a culturally based thing. You know, that was the way that that was a woman. You know, her dealings were tied up with, you know, the kitchen. You know, sometimes I say to students, you know, the word economia, you know, it's a Greek word, it means administration, you know. So we used to, you know, women used to take courses in home economics. So economics there had nothing to do as such with, only with finances, it was with the household administration. So the woman was in charge of the house. That was her domain. That was her responsibility. Now, of course, that's changed. There are things that historically men did that women now do, and vice versa. There are other things, of course, that are just differences that are fundamental to our humanity as men and fundamental to the humanity of women as women. And it seems to me that these are good things, and they're matters of complementarity. The kind of sex that men and women have is a reproductive type act. Even when I say reproductive type, that doesn't mean it always results in, of course it doesn't always result in conception, but it's the kind of act that's reproductive. And reproductive type sex acts are unitive acts such that the man and the woman become a single organism. What woman considers it oppressive if a man opens the door for her? Or you stand up if a woman comes into a board meeting or comes into a room, or you hold if a woman is going, you know, you go into a restaurant with your wife or a woman that you're taking out for dinner or something, and you pull back the chair so that she can sit down. Or, I mean, I just think sometimes people are going to laugh about this. I mean, you'd have to be persuaded that somehow any act that highlights a difference between a man and a woman is somehow an oppressive act. Benevolent sexism, I mean, the fact that it's called sexism assumes that there's something oppressive there, that the very fact that the man is holding the door for you, the very fact that the man, you know, pays for your dinner, the very fact that he holds, you know, he pulls the chair out or stands up. I mean, who thinks that those acts are inherently oppressive acts?
I think the idea is that he wants, that the people behind this study want people to think that way. So they start putting studies like this out there so they can be desensitizing to us, and we could say, maybe I am being mistreated.
Right. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And he was mentioning a cultural situation where he's Mexican. I'm part Mexican too, and I saw these roles that were very, very clear. I grew up with very clear roles myself, and I actually like them. My mother taught me, for example, something that maybe is unique to the Hispanic culture is a young man, he calls you, like he pursues you. Let him show interest, you know. And what I noticed was that it made me feel treasured because I knew that he was interested, and then in turn, I noticed that he was also happier because he was being allowed to be in his role, to pursue, to show his interest, you know. So even these kind of things that might seem trivial, I really do think that they allow for people to understand and appreciate the differences. They're beautiful. God created us to be complementary to each other.
Right. Well, of course, you know, St. John Paul II did a lot of teaching on theology of the body, and people may not realize that every Wednesday in Rome, the Holy Father gives us an audience. Well, back in the 80s, that's when John Paul II gave us the beautiful theology of the body teachings. What I'd like to do right now is read a little bit long quote, but I think it's worthwhile because it addresses this. He actually gave this at the general audience on August 11th in 1982 as part of his Theology of the Body catechesis, and this is what he had to say. Addressing husbands and wives, the author recommends them to be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. The mutual relations of husband and wife should flow from their common relationship with Christ. It is above all a case of respect for holiness. The mystery of Christ, penetrating their hearts, should lead them to be subject to one another. In fact, we read, "Wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord." In saying this, the author does not intend to say that the husband is the lord of the wife, and that the interpersonal pact power to marriage is the pact of domination of the husband over wife. Instead, he expresses a different concept, that the wife can and should find in her relationship with Christ, who is one Lord of both the spouses, the motivation of that relationship with her husband, which flows from the very essence of marriage and of the family. Such a relationship, however, is not one of one-sided domination. The husband and wife are, in fact, subject to one another and are mutually subordinated to one another. The author of the letter underlines this love in a special way. In addressing himself to husbands, he writes, "Husbands, love your wives." By expressing himself in this way, he removes any fear that might have given rise from the previous phrase, "Wives, be subject to your husbands." Love excludes every kind of subjection whereby the wife might become a servant or a slave of the husband, an object of unilateral domination. Love makes the husband simultaneously subject to the wife and thereby subject to the Lord himself, just as the wife to the husband. The community or unity which they should establish through marriage is constituted by a reciprocal donation of self, which is also a mutual subjection.
But that whole thing of, as I was saying before the break, of this sacrificial idea of marriage, giving yourself totally for the benefit of the other person. The world is just not.
The world is opposite that.
Right.
Opposite.
You enter a relationship just to take or make me happy,
quid pro quo.
Right. Instead of saying I'm going to enter into this relationship to serve, to honor, and to help that person get to heaven. I mean, the priorities are shifting, and unfortunately.
But this really scares me because some people are saying, "Oh, it's just one study," but when it's taken and it's blown up as this huge story, and you come up with a phrase, you know, the language is very effective. Benevolent sexism. It gets the idea into the head, especially of younger girls. And I was mentioning before the break that there's a lot of experts, Pam Stenzel, Dr. Miriam Grossman, who are looking at now the increase in violence in relationships. Teenage girls are now thinking in many ways, because of the studies that have been done, that some sort of violence in a dating relationship is normal. Not only normal, but a sign of love. And what does this say? This is that same, subtle or maybe not so subtle idea that it's better to be treated badly than to be treated well. We have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to turn it over to our teacher in residence for our homework.
Well, just briefly, I want to remind our viewers, we have our beautiful symbol, the Madonna of the Kitchen, available at the Religious Catalog, which, of course, if that's in your home, this is the true looking to Mary, to how women should be treated. And of course, for homework, we want you to visit our website, The Catholic View for Women, to see the discussion and questions, sign up for our monthly e-letter. Also, we want you to read St. John Paul II's papal letter to women and on the dignity and vocation of women, in which he describes true liberation for women. And of course, number 3, I read just a quote from that beautiful catechesis from August 11th, 1982 of the Theology of the Body. And just to read that whole catechesis from that audience is perfect. And of course, Teresa, your book, Extreme Makeover, has a lot of information in there.
I have a whole chapter on Jesus, our greatest fan, our biggest liberator on that. Right. And there's also a relatively new magazine called Verily Magazine that we're going to be discussing in another episode of The Catholic View. It's a beautiful, beautiful magazine for young women, all about their dignity and about fashion and you know, putting our best feet and shoes forward for the Lord.
That's right.
We're all out of time. Great discussion. Don't forget, as Janet said, always great resources at thecatholicviewforwomen.com. For yours truly, Astrid Bennett Gutierrez and Janet Morana, I'm Teresa Tomeo, and we will see you next time on The Catholic View. And by the way, enjoy The Catholic View. Thanks for tuning in.